Throughout the mid-1980s, the video game industry was dominated by Nintendo thanks to the Nintendo Entertainment System, which managed to put the gaming industry at a near bankruptcy and captured the hearts of the public with numerous classic games that made Nintendo and their mascot Super Mario the unrivaled Goliath of gaming. But, for every Goliath, there is a David. Fast forward to 1991, where video game developer Sega are trying to market their console, the Sega Mega Drive, known in the US as the Genesis. Now, to market this console, they needed a new mascot to replace their current mascot, Alex Kidd. An eternal contest was held amongst the Sega employees to come up with a new mascot character. Ideas ranged from a rabbit in a bow tie to a man in pajamas designed in the image of Theodore Roosevelt, and finally a blue hedgehog who would eventually become known as Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog became the titular character of what would become the first game franchise to rival Super Mario Bros. The idea behind Sonic's trademark speed came from game director Yuji Naka's habit of trying to beat Super Mario's World 1-1 in the fastest time possible. From this idea came a game the likes of which audiences had never seen due to the colorful graphics, exhilarating speeds, level design, and the personality of the game's protagonist. And even Teddy Roosevelt's design was used for the game's villain, Dr. Robotnik. Sonic was a cultural phenomenon during the early 90s, which is proven by research that shows that children recognize Sonic the Hedgehog more than Mickey Mouse or Abraham Lincoln. He was also the first video game character to be featured as a parade balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And by the third installment, Sega had Michael Jackson composing the game's soundtrack. But it wasn't all popped balloons and pop stars that caused Sega's success. That can be attributed to their marketing.
What Nintendo?
Nintendo fought back with full force with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System that had better graphics, better sound quality, and a plethora of games, many of which would go on to be considered highlights of their franchises.
I think the reason why the SNES outsold the Mega Drive is purely games, because besides Sonic and Mortal Kombat, I can think of more killer apps for the SNES than the Sega Mega Drive.
From the mid to late 90s, Sega weren't quite the threat to Nintendo anymore. Their first 3D console, the Sega Saturn, sold poorly due to questionable advertising decisions and business practices, though the Saturn's Japanese advertising was pretty special. While the Nintendo 64 was a hit and had multiple genre-defining games and set the standard for 3D gaming in general, yet it couldn't compete to the Sony PlayStation. Sega's final attempt at the console market came in 1999 with the Sega Dreamcast, which was a relative success. It provided us with 2 new Sonic games and a fairly vast library of other cult classic games. Following this in 2001 was a Nintendo GameCube, which lacked support from third-party developers but still had a library of quality games, most notably Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is still played in tournaments over 13 years after its release. But once again, neither Nintendo nor Sega could compete with Sony, ultimately causing Sega to leave the console market and publishing games for other systems, including Nintendo's.
Well, Nintendo's still doing good. Game-wise, they've been making some really good games, and also they've got a good console behind them, but their marketing is a little bit shaky. Sega have been publishing some duds over the years, but I personally think they've managed to get really some good ones as well, and their fan base actually managed to do some good in the world. For example, the Sonic-a-thon managed to raise over $20,000, and Bayonetta 2 has both their names in them. Well, that's just awesome.
These days, Nintendo and Sega have a fairly friendly working relationship, but the feud between these two companies has inspired a book written by Blake Harris and an upcoming film by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. Both companies have had a fairly bumpy road getting to where they are today, and it may not be entirely clear skies from here on out, but they've both stood the test of time and show no signs of slowing down anytime soon.